on the field, and when we go onto the field, we have different methods to try and negate some of that in terms of robot performance.
Oops. My bad.
Oh.
Stay.
Oh,
I gotta like put it in this thing. Sick. I got it.
This is really good.
This is
Calculated door close. All right.
alrighty.
So I'm the drive coach for 4476. For those of you who don't know me, I've been drive coaching since 2017 for Waffles, and then have been on drive team as a student, driver, operator, etc. Been doing FIRST since 2009, so it's been, well, FRC since 2009, so it's been a trip around the block in terms of different games and how to play them. So it's always a good time.
And I'm Taegen, so I also did FRC as a student. I was on 771, and I was a human player on SWAT, and then graduated, went to Queens. When I went to Queens, I joined Waffles in 2017, so I had a bit of a hiatus in my FRC career, you can say. But then getting involved with strategy in like 2017, 2018, to now being the one of the co-lead strategy members of Waffles. And I've got a whole off season of drive coaching, but really what I focus on is the strategy and match planning implementation throughout the season, along with other things like awards, electrical, etc., etc. So things like that. So brief overview of what we're going to go over today. So you can see we've kind of split it up into two components. Our first bit is strategy in design. So looking from kickoff day, pretty much the first week or so after that, and how you can really make sure that strategically you are keeping that in mind throughout. And then the second part is more focused on scouting and strategy, event planning, preparation, and how to execute while at an event. And then we've got a little case study afterwards about champs this year. So brief show of hands before we get too far into it. How much, I guess it's hard to say, how much experience would y'all feel like you have? Anyone new to strategy and this is their first year or two? And with a couple of seasons under their belts, anyone consider themselves a seasoned vet? Sweet. So a good range of experience in the room. A lot of the examples are obviously going to be from more recent games, just because that's more relatable. But if you have any questions about anything in particular, also just feel free to stop us. And we have a few question breaks built in as well. So first part, strategy in design. So setting and meeting your goals. A lot of talks today will have talked about why goal setting is important. And this is true across all facets of an FRC team. The main thing is you want to discuss these goals before the season, and you want to do them as a team so everyone's on board. One of the biggest things is making sure that everyone is pulling together towards the same end game. You want to make sure that you're not, dragging others across the line. As a team, you are committed together. So once you've set that goal, you do want to look at what it is to actually achieve it, what you need to do. So I guess show of hands, whose goal this year is to make district championships? How about making championships? Who's looking to get picked and play in a limbs at championships?
It would be wonderful.
So keeping these goals in mind, what do we actually need to do to make them? So we pulled the numbers from 2024 Ontario. Obviously different if you're in a regional zone like Brazil, which is great, and it's amazing to have you. But in Ontario, to make provincial championships, you need to get picked twice. Your robot needs to function, and you need to not get a ton of fouls for no particular reason. Doing these things and doing only these things gets you to district championships. Anything above that, cherry on top. To make championships this year, we're looking at teams that are competing for finals or the top 3 at their 2 prior district events. You're looking for teams that have likely seeded top 8 at both of their district events, top 4 alliances at district championships, and need to get an award or 2 somewhere along the way. Obviously, not all of these things are mandatory to make champs, but the cutoff from district champs to champs in Ontario is very wide. So if you're looking to make DCMP, not super difficult. If you're looking to make championships, it's a bit more of an undertaking and requires a bit more consistency at a higher level. Getting picked at championships, you need all the prerequisites, but above that, you probably want to be competing for finals at your district events and a bit better at DCMP as well. Top 3 alliances on your field, and you should be looking to see top 8 and be competitive at your district level to be picked at districts. One of the things that happens at champs, sometimes teams that are meant to get picked or should be picked don't get picked. This isn't a perfect formula, but these are the things you should be aiming for, and these are how you see your goals, set your goals, achieve those goals. Did I miss anything? Oh, sweet.
Yeah, so all of that's going to loop into how we actually do strategy on Waffles, and one of the main things that we're going to talk about in this section is understanding the game from an early set point. For example, with 2024, knowing that passing is going to be a critical part of the game can influence your robot design, for example. So we have a kickoff worksheet that we work through that has been developed, I guess, from other teams previously, but we've highly modified it over the course of our years, kind of the existing. And this is something that we do day one to help understand the game. And we don't have to go through necessarily all of it, or we're not going to go through all of it right now. But basically, there's a whole bunch of preset questions that help us understand the game on a more fundamental level that are specifically designed to make you think about some of the things that might be important for the game that comes up. So generally, I would say that we have a pretty solid understanding of how the game is going to develop, even on day one, compared to a lot of other teams, because of the way that we go through this, and we've iterated the questions such that it gets us to think specifically about some of the things that maybe have been critical for games in the past and see if they still apply to games in the future. And you can use that understanding of games in the past to predict how things are going to go in the future.
Should we just keep scrolling through this? Or
No, we'll go back to the...
Okay, cool. Sweet. Right here.
So one of the really important things that we do on day one is understanding the value of specific actions that are taken in the game. So this is kind of how 2024 is broken down. But what we're essentially doing is we're equivalating actions that are scoring in an amp, and how many amp notes does it take to outweigh a foul that you might take, or a trap note that you're scoring, or an amplified note. And the point of this is you're understanding what tasks are going to be most valuable in terms of earning points for winning the matches. This doesn't really help with ranking points. There's other things you can talk about. But at the end of the day, in Elims, it's about points and having a good understanding of what actions are going to be the easiest to take, and then how they relate to other things is going to be important. So right off the day one, we were very concerned about amp efficiency and making sure that we're maximizing 4 notes, basically. And one of the things that immediately jumped off of that is okay, well, we need to be passing to be able to do that, because being able to reliably get enough cycles in just raw cycling power, you're going to be prone to defense and that kind of stuff. It's not easy, especially if your alliance isn't 3 2056s on your thing. So
especially day one too, when they hadn't clarified that an amplification cycle was limited to 4 notes, passing looked very, very important, because you just want to run one crazy cycle to get as many notes as you can in there. Obviously that got patched out, but things like that, when you look at it and you say, okay, for 2 amplified notes and 2 amp notes and a speaker note versus 3 non-amplified speaker notes, it's still worth more. And now I've started an amp period. So something like that, you look at that and you already think, okay, first of all, this amp isn't just a low goal to score in for the sake of scoring. It has huge implications on how you play the game.
Yeah, and I guess another big takeaway is just the fact that amping was so powerful that the 3 notes from an amp speaker is worth more than 3 unamplified notes. So that's another thing that you can kind of take away from this kind of comparison is, how do I use my resources in terms of game pieces scored and objectives? And you can immediately say, okay, well, amping is basically non-negotiable. If you want to win a match, you have to do it.
And especially then you look at RPs later and it's like, okay, it also counts towards the RP. May as well do it.
Yeah. So it's kind of hard to read some of these, but maybe
I could pull up the sheet again, pick some questions.
Well, those are the main. We still.
What did I have? Sorry. Well, things like the field. In terms of the field. Pick one when you want me to stop.
Which ones do we have?
We got teleop strategy, matching fouls. It was mostly teleop stuff. Go grab it.
Yeah.
We'll get there.
It's a quite extensive document that we do on day one.
This is auto strategy, so you have both an auto and a teleop strategy point on here. Here we go. Here.
Yeah, so on day one, we're talking about feeding, passing with the feed chain, source to mid, mid to wing, wing to score. We were talking about designating robots for amp or speaker at specific times of the match to make sure that we're maximizing our amp. There's like sightline stuff that we look at.
This one. Placed on the field.
Vulnerability. Defense. Being tall is bad, and then the middle is kind of a contested zone for autos.
Field elements that are helpful to remember. April tags everywhere, yay.
Yeah.
Heavy traffic. That's one to consider.
Yeah, so we basically just have a whole bunch of different things. We can we can link that, but
and everyone on the team is involved in this as well. Like, it's not just the strategy sub team. On kickoff, when everyone's there, we've split it into 3 groups, and then each group had a section, and then we like brought it all back together afterwards and discussed and filled each other in on the other sections. Because you want your whole team to know what you're doing. That's kind of part of it, is you want everyone to understand strategy, at least to some basic level on your team. I take this away now.
Yeah.
So one of the most valuable tools that we have found in the last few years for understanding the game early on is using FRC Simulator, which is a free to download virtual version of your FRC game that comes out on kickoff. With XRC, there's going to be a robot day one. Last year, it was even the kit bot that you could play, and you could get a feel for the field without having to build it yourself day one, without having to do any of that. You can visualize this field. You don't have to do human player matches this way, although you still can if you find them fun. But here you're using a robot. It's all to scale. It's all correct. And you can do what human player matches used to do. So an example is, for those who know Deep Space in 2019, the position of the rocket in 2019 and how you could defend it by just parking in front of it, that's something that gets revealed to you using XRC. And then gameplay, because you can set up servers and play with 5 other people to replicate a match. It revealed the existence of G424 penalty drawing like 2 hours after kickoff. Also showed that like subwoofer defense was very strong against subwoofer only robots, but then as you had robots with more range, that became less powerful. So those are some things that we saw in 2024 from it. Also things like harmony positioning, how triple climb probably wasn't going to happen, and then it didn't happen. Because you can play matches so quickly and so easily, the meta evolves in XRC a lot faster than it does in build season when there's no functional robots and there's no one playing together. So I gathered some quotes from the community as well, because I asked the players in like play race. From day one, we were told that you don't want the intake and shooter on the same side of the robot. We were showed that the subwoofer gets clogged very easily. Both of these had major effects on our design process. Someone I noticed says, first thing I noticed when trying it sim was how hard harmony is and how much coordination involves. Triple bot climbs are almost impossible, and so on and so on. And all of these things are day one. You're not having to prototype this. You don't have to ask around. This is just a community online. So super valuable, and it has every game for FRC going back to 2020, and it will continue to for the foreseeable future. So recommend it highly, highly, highly.
I will say our team's like super invested in this too. Like in terms of the community itself, I think we're at like 40,000 matches played over the last 4 years. So players really do understand the game strategically a lot better. It's a strategy tool. It's not so much a design tool that, you're not going to like figure out, oh, this robot is specifically really good, but you understand why certain things work, why passing is a thing, because that's one of the things that happens in the sim immediately. You're passing, you see how important it is, you see how important it is to optimize your 10 seconds of amp time, and those kinds of lessons are really easy to learn right at the start, so that you, when you're designing your robot, have a fundamental understanding of what is kind of high level gameplay going to be like.
It's also free, which is huge for teams that no one has infinite resources, but the fact that it's free, the fact that you can do it immediately because it comes out on game release, are all desirable things. And then throughout the season too, you can do driver training and driver practice on it. We trained our driver on defense by bullying him in the sim for several hours on end when we didn't have a robot that could play defense on him. And I mean, it's not exactly the same, but you do still learn those skills that carry over onto on-field performance.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, the kids love it.
And it's ranked too. Like for those who like video games, it has a ranked community. You can play. There are sometimes like small events that are held that are one day. So that's all well and good. It also is there as a resource, and it's an official supported FRC resource as well. So take advantage of your resources.
Okay, so all of this is kind of leading up to how do you actually win matches for each game, and that's something that you have to have an understanding of, both for strategic design, which is kind of what this section is about, but also just the game in general. And I think a lot of teams, when I talk to a lot of teams, there's a lot of like, oh, I didn't know that passing was going to be a big deal. We didn't really predict that. That was kind of like something that we added on later. And really the goal of all these tools and these thoughts is to find those things early, so that you're prepared and you feel like you're on the ball, I guess. So in terms of early season, like first 3 weeks, generally how you win is don't break and score points. It's not really
it's not that deep.
Yes, the strategy and that kind of stuff really makes its biggest impact later on in the season. And so, as I'm sure multiple of the presentations here have said, is keeping simple and making sure that you have a robot that is functional is kind of step one to being able to do anything. In terms of actually getting later on in the season, we talk about the things that separate the great teams from the good teams, and what their differential are, or what they're actually getting. So when we talk about that, we analyze the game in terms of what are the key roles or the most important aspects of winning the game. And then generally the best teams are going to be playing these specific roles because they're the best. They're going to do the thing that impacts the most amount of matches. So in terms of 2024, it's things like amp efficiency and midline auto nodes. Those are the two kind of like key roles in terms of what the best teams are doing. They're finishing the cycles, making sure that they get the 4 in the 10 seconds, and they're running the autos that are contesting the midline nodes to make sure that they're removing the scoring ability from their opponents. In terms of 2023, it's link efficiency, making sure that you're placing game pieces where you're generating links and you're not just arbitrarily placing them, and then making sure that you're hitting the triple balance in terms of elims in the end, and then at champs being able to fill the grid, or basically getting the piece volume to get through that. So all of this kind of links back to something that is quite fundamental for your goal setting, where we kind of started off as is alliance composition. And this is important to understand from an early on in the season, to be able to correctly design strategically. A lot of teams this year made strategic decisions that maybe don't necessarily make sense. So there were some teams that decided to do like amp-only robots, for example. And the way that we kind of determine this, right, is we're looking at first of all, what is your goal? What kind of niche are you trying to fit in? Like, are you a top team that's looking to pick people? Okay, then that goal setting maybe is a little bit easier because you can kind of say, well, we want to do the things that are going to get us seeding high and scoring a lot of points. The more interesting kind of strategic analysis is like, okay, well, I'm a team that I don't feel super confident in like ranking and winning the event, but I want to be picked and be desirable, especially in the later season. So as the level of competition kind of grows in district champs and champs, how do I make my robot so that it's actually able to be desirable for an alliance that might happen to compete at that? And that's kind of where the robots that are kind of focusing only on the amp run into a bit of problem because unfortunately for this year's game, just like an amp only robot was not desirable. And that kind of goes back to our efficient amp point, is that we know that being efficient with the amp, and there's only one robot that can really score on the amp at a time. If you are putting your weakest robot on the most important role, it just doesn't make sense for a winning strategy. So you know that you're going to have some of the best teams in the world, they're going to be doing that. Now, if they're already doing that role, what can you do to supplement them that's not going to be like getting in their way, basically? Yeah, so like I said, there's kind of different things. Obviously, the amp robot or like an amp only robot can be viable at like a district level. You know, they're scoring points reliably. They're contributing to the alliance. But as you kind of get through the season, you want to make sure that you still have viability if that is one of your goals to like get picked at champs, for example. Compatibility with auto paths is another huge thing. Understanding, going back once again, when you look at some of the top teams, you know that one of the highest objectives is contesting the mid nodes. That's going to win you a lot of matches by denying them points and also getting points for yourself. So the good teams are going to be doing that. You as a team that maybe isn't like the number one team in the division or whatever, you're going to have some compatible auto that is going to work alongside that. And it can be cool to have a midline note and have that flexibility. But if you are trying to reduce how much time you're putting in and resources, you only have time to make one auto or two autos, maybe you don't invest that time in like the number one auto, even though it's better in theory. You know that when you're working with teams that when you're getting picked, they're going to handle that kind of thing.
So for example, just on that quickly, in 2024, it would have been those three close notes. In 23, we were picked and played, and we went from being like competitive at our district events, like winning an event, seeding first in our division at DCMP. At champs, for us, it was so important to lock down the like cross the platform and back auto, because that's what we were going to get picked for, to not be in each other's way. Even though apparently our best auto was running a bump side two-piece, which was odd for us because it didn't work all season long, and we showed up to champs and it's great. Wasn't super helpful for us because what we wanted for where we were to be strategically viable as a pick was for a bang on, cross the bridge, pick up a note or pick up a piece and score it. And we didn't have that at champs. So we didn't get picked where we had hoped to get picked because that auto wasn't working. So it's things like that where recognizing where you fall and like honing in on those things that are strategically useful for you.
Yeah, and then kind of going back to different roles of teams that are competing. Certain roles are kind of one robot only kind of jobs. Like I said, kind of with the amp, it's kind of hard to manage robots swinging in and out. So a lot of the teams at World Championships kind of designated one team to do that exclusively to simplify, and making sure that you recognize that that team is probably going to be one of the stronger teams on the alliance. And, you know, depending on where your goals are and what you're trying to accomplish, designing for that in mind.
Okay.
Yep.
So strategic design considerations, keeping an alliance that may form in mind, keeping your own personal goals in mind. One of the key components is keeping strategy in mind from the get-go, how do you design a strategically sound robot for the game? So once the game has come out and once you've seen it, start by figuring out where you're going to score from. Are you able to score from one spot? Are you able to score from multiple spots? Make sure you at least lock in one useful spot before you spend time diversifying. Ideally, you can make sure that that spot is somewhere that's not defendable, and then you've got this like clear-cut shot that you can replicate over and over and over in a match. Then you can expand your reach. That's one of the big things too. A lot of teams have to make sure to balance their resources, don't overstep too early. We value as a team a lot like locking in and starting small and building from there. It's always easier to like hone in on one thing than do a bunch of things really badly, which is a common theme throughout a lot of these talks. Another common question that gets asked year after year is floor pickup. If there are game pieces that you have to interact, where do they normally exist? How can you pick them up? Where can you pick them up from? How many game pieces start on the ground? Are there likely to be a lot of drops? That's one of those ones where you decide, is it strategically viable to only do human player pickups, or do you need to pick them up off the floor? An example of this in 2024, there's a ton of pieces on the floor because everyone's passing them all over the place. So if you're just going and picking them up straight from the human player, you're going to have a bad time. But if you're designing to be more conservative in the season and you're building like the WCP competitive concept robot where you're just looking to be competitive at your events, like 9785 was one of the best passing robots in the province, Electrona, and they could only pick up from the source because their goals weren't to be a finishing robot. Their goals were just to score a lot of stuff, like shoot a lot of stuff. So that viability is always a question for year on year. Another question that normally happens, do you want to pick up and score from the same side of the robot, or do you want the piece to pass through your robot? That's something that you want to consider. And in that, you can consider where the pieces start in the match for autonomous relative to where they got to go. If you think it's faster for them to go up and through your robot versus across the torso of the robot, then you can do that as well. This year, you saw the vast majority of teams picking up and scoring from opposite sides. Happened in 2020 as well was one of those years. But some years it doesn't matter as much, like 2023, where you could pick up and score on the same side. How valuable is the end game? This is one where especially you'll refer to your points comparison. If you're not designing to be picking, and ranking isn't the be-all and end-all for you in particular, it may be more valuable to tune your teleop skills over your end game abilities, and that will drastically simplify your robot. Some years, you look at the points and you go, climbing is worth it. 2017, climbing is worth it. There are some years, then the year after, 2018, not as important. In 2022, it was important for seeding. In 2024, think trap as well. Like people looked at trap for seeding and were like, oh, this is super important. So few teams did trap well, and we saw teams that were better in teleop seeding, like 2026 can't trap. That's a classic example. So look at the viability of that. And in 2025, we know that there are two game pieces. FIRST has given us this information, and with that, we can already start to plan. When the game manual comes out, we can already start looking at the viability of specializing in a game piece versus being more of an all-around robot. So that's something that we'll keep in mind for next year. So all of these things are like strategic design considerations. So we're not just building a robot archetype that looks cool. We're building one that's going to play the game for us at a high level. Unless you want to build one that's cool, in which case, all power to you. Similarly, choosing your archetype, now that you've considered these things, again, loop back to your preseason goals. And we emphasize the giant season-specific priority list. This is ours from 2024. Obviously, you can't read it, but it had 64 lines by the end because you list every task that you can do. And what we do is we literally everything. We've got drive, strafe, score from the subwoofer, score from the sides of the subwoofer, etc., trap, climb with the harmony, have underglow. Like all of these things are on here. And then we rank them by strategic need and viability. Driving should always be rank 1. Strafing in the modern era is probably rank 2. But for your team, if that resource is too big of a drain, it wouldn't be as high on your list if you were going to be a tank robot. There are some very effective tank robots that still exist if your goal is to be competitive at your district events, and DCMP less so if champs is on the table for you. Then we've ranked them this year. We did it by event of goals for first event, green, second event, purple, district champs and champs. We put into one blue section because the time turnaround isn't enough to split for us. And then we had the heck nah group, which were things that we either weren't going to attempt at all, weren't going to invest time into, but if they happened, they were a happy coincidence. So for example, shooting from the sides of the subwoofer for us was we're not going to spend time working on it as long as you can do the front. Now, could we? Yes. Did we? Yes. But that wasn't one of our design considerations from the get-go. This is also if you plan on making improvements through the season, if that's your goal. If you don't do that, you can separate them into the must, should, could, won't categories. That's another way that you can break it down. But for us, we were focusing improvement throughout the season, and this is the way that we broke down. And crazily, I'd say we hit probably 85% of our goals this year. We overreached a little bit, for sure, on what we could do. We designed a robot that could do trap, which distinctly never did trap once. So, whoops. But things like that, making that priority list and referring back to it all the time when you have to cut things. Don't cut the thing you needed for event one. Cut the thing that would have been a nice to have at champs. And that way you're still making a structurally sound robot that's within your means.
And again, kind of just looping that back to making sure that those goals track alongside the alliance composition stuff we were talking about before. What is going to be viable for you to reach your goals? If you want to get picked at district champs, what does a robot look like that is getting picked at district champs?
Right. You talk about cutting something that doesn't add strategic value first, which obviously makes sense, and prioritizing something you need for your first event. Do you ever recommend cutting something you need for your first event but not anything else past that? Like it only has an early use,
Yeah,
kind of dies off. Would you cut that first versus something that you may have time later in the season to revisit, but you cut that for now for the sooner priority?
that actually did happen. So in terms of like trap viability, we kind of viewed that as a more powerful thing that was on the early season, because teams are going to be less competent and less able to get like harmony climbs and climbs, other ways that you can do the ranking point. So literally in 2024, that was something that we wanted to have the trap for the first event. After we didn't get it for the first event, we're like, okay, well,
We pushed it to second for like a minute. We're like,
in terms of viability, right? The efficiency of it, or like how good it is, just degrades basically over time as teams become more competent. And because it's something that's so complicated that we didn't need to invest in, we're just like, all right, well, we're done with it. Yeah.
Is it ever worth it to sort of sacrifice your performance at early events to sort of make a trade-off to do well later? So like, for example, let's say like, my team has made the decision that trap is a must-have for this game, whether that like actually happen or not. And we're going to say that trap is so worth it that we are going to sacrifice the performance at our first event by investing all of our resources in trap to have it like guaranteed by our second event. Or if you understand that is the case, are you then overscoping and then should dial things back?
First of all, I think it fully depends on the game. Like trap this year, I'd say would not be a good example of doing that. Where it's like have it for like sync your first event, have it for your second, because the trade-off that you're going to see between that is not going to be worth. Also, it's your goals. If your goals are to make champs, you need to be strong at all your events. So being 10% weaker at both events versus like this hypothetical 30% jump that may or may not happen, won't work. Stuff gets in the way. FRC is a luck game anyways half the time, so it doesn't work out in your favor. Like, it depends on your theoretical, but I would say largely no.
Yeah, I would agree. Generally, don't sacrifice your early performance. Just make sure that you're hitting the key parts of the game for like this year, amp and speaker, or if you can't do amp, probably would choose speaker over just doing amp, because you at least have some viability, like in the long run, being picked by somebody. Focusing on that.
Yeah. This is now just open question time.
Yeah.
So any questions on anything we've covered thus far?
What do you guys do to think about like which game pieces are more valuable and less valuable?
That would be your points analysis.
Yeah, it basically comes down to points analysis. In terms of like games that have had multiple years that have had multiple game pieces. For example, 2017, the points analysis is going to be very obvious with that between the fuel and the gears. The fuel was like a million fuel for like 20 points or whatever. And then the gears, you could do much less. So things like comparing just how much volume you need to do or how viable it is for 2017 is pretty easy. For a game that's like 2023 where, cones versus cubes and that kind of thing, it's obviously a lot closer. I don't think that either game piece was like particularly stronger than the other. It was, for the most part, just kind of equivalent. There were some teams that did like cube only because there's
a whole low.
Well, yeah, you can put the triangle.
There were more spots that you could do, but not by significant number.
For cones, yeah.
Do you ever like look at the fact that a game piece may be 4 points like advantageous, but avoid using it because you think that it'll be oversaturated in teams? Like 19, for example, like cargo or something.
There's definitely something to that in terms of like going back to the alliance composition part. It's like you have to look at when you're evaluating something like that where you want to specialize, especially if there's two game pieces, and making sure that you make the right decision and you don't like specialize in a useless game piece, is understanding how alliances are going to be composed. And generally for a two game piece event or like years, the first two robots are pretty unequivocally going to be able to do both. There are some, niche cases like 2017, for example, where there's a lot of just gear-only robots, alliances, and that kind of thing. But generally, at the highest level, both are going to be viable. And then it comes down to what, if you're being that third robot, which is kind of the range that you'd be talking about, like specializing on one at a high level, what is that alliance looking for? In 2017, they weren't really looking for fuel because it's hard to. One of the key things about fuel, right, is they were taking it from like the loader station thing that they would pop, and only one or two robots can do that. You don't want your less competent robot to do that, so you would evaluate that and say, okay, well, 2017, the robot's going to be looking for gears. Play that and focus on that.
Any other questions? Okay. So this like segues us now. Assume your build season's like mostly done. You've built your robot. We're now going to implement scouting and strategy into how we do things. So we'll start with a pre-event to-do list. So step 1, this will vary for teams. It'll change how it looks like, but it's choosing your strategy procedure and standardizing that strategy team. So how are you going to run your strat team? Are you going to have a strategist and a coach? Is your coach going to be your strategist if you don't have the resources for multiple? How are they going to interact with your scouts? And trying to train new folks and avoid on-the-go training as much as possible. So for Waffles, the way that this looks is I am the lead strategy mentor for events. I'll have students with me if the year allows it and we've got the resources to do it, but we have like 15 students per year, so sometimes we don't have the resources to do that, and it's just me. Brennan, our drive coach, has strategic input, has value, has thoughts that are meaningful, but at the event, it's my job primarily to deal with other teams, match planning, match review. Then we have our lead scout, who is a mentor, and then our lead scout student, who runs that scouting team and runs that back end. The way that we interface, I will go and talk to them, but we also have an app that allows students to make comments. It allows like scouts to make comments and ask questions that strategists can go answer in the field. So one example of this is scouts can put in their comment, they can say, Team Dave has died in their match. Why? And I will see this pop up, and when I go to look at Dave, and I walk on over to Dave, and I go, my scout said you died. Why'd you die? And I can answer that, so then the scout can go look at it later.
Poor Dave.
Our encoders are good now. It's all good.
I believe you.
Yeah, but that gives us a lot of information in terms of like the team as well, based on the way that they respond and understanding, like, they died, then if they're saying, our wires were completely unplugged and we just forgot to plug them back in, it's like, okay, that's probably a solvable problem. Sometimes you go and talk to the team, they're like, yeah, we have no idea why it just started working again. It's just, who knows?
That's the worst answer. Please.
You never like to hear those ones, but that's useful information for when you're with or against that team or thinking about alliance selection process, evaluating teams based on like how competent they are at dealing with those problems. Because some of the best teams run into problems where they die repeatedly, and you can verify that they are no longer broken, and kind of pick up a team that maybe is a little bit more risky on the alliance selection side, but you're still getting that value because you trust in their ability to improve.
So a lot of people were over in the 1241, 1285 talk, where they talked about how they had a rough first day of DCMP. When we talked to them at the end of day one of DCMP, and they're like, yep, this is why, we knew that the data showed that they were way worse than they were. And so one of our...
Way better than they were, yeah.
That's what I meant. Thank you. Way better than they were. That's what I mean. They were doing worse than they should be. And so we were able to take that into account when it was our scouting meeting, and like maybe the average, I don't know what it was, maybe the average had them 14th. We would like way boost them because we're like, okay, they had these issues first 5 matches. Look at their average in the second half of the matches, and oh my God, this team is popping off and we want them. Things like that can contextualize it. So all of those interfaces and interactions happen on our team. If you don't have the resources to do that, that is completely fine. The main thing is you want to figure out how you're going to do things at an event before you get there instead of figuring it out on the go. One of the issues that we've had for the last few years is I have slacked on training my strat students before an event. And then I'm like, don't worry, they'll pick it up on the fly. They do not pick it up on the fly. It is not working, and it slows you down. It slows the other alliances down. The kids are frustrated because you haven't done your job in training them, and nobody's happy. So training people and avoiding on-the-go training, if at all possible. Also discussing hypotheticals. Brennan and I talk a lot about robotics and things that are happening. We will watch week 0 events with our students. We will watch early events if we're not going to a week 1 event. And we'll discuss what's happening. We'll go, oh, well, people are watching Chesy and they're probably going, oh my goodness, what are these teams doing? And discussing like the strats that are happening. Do that early. Watch your week 0. As painful as it may be week 0 when everyone sucks because it's week 0, discuss what's happening and start to see the game evolve. And like hypotheticals as well. Yeah,
even before week 0, Taegen and I are constantly talking about different scenarios of like, okay, both of us are kind of on like separate alliances versus each other, so to speak. And like, okay, it's us, plus 2 other robots, 2 other combinations. Like maybe we're with a team that's like 2056 that they're very strong, or against a team that's very strong like them, but we're with like 2 boxes on wheels. How are we going to optimize our gameplay for that? It's like, okay, well, we're going to be passing to ourselves. We're going to make sure that we still get good amp cycles. We're going to have one defending and one like in these different areas. How are we going to optimize this to make sure that we can get the most out of it? And sometimes it's not a win. It's just making sure you get ranking points or whatever. Discussing those hypotheticals before you have to actually run into them, because there are a lot of like standard situations that happen a lot, I guess. And having a good idea of how you would approach that for a generic like team that maybe isn't so good at scoring, or a team that is great at scoring, and how does that alliance function on the field? And
you can test that out again with XRC. For full disclosure, I'm terrible at video games. I'm terrible at XRC. I understand the theory. I can't get my fingers to do the things they're supposed to do. But you can still see it and like know what you should be doing, even if you can't actually hit the goals the way you're supposed to. Things like this, you can like test out a strat in XRC, see how it worked compared to another one. So again, like using the resources that are available to you and just having your strat team talk. Like if they're sitting and deburring apart, like they should be talking about the game while they're deburring it. Things like that. And part of that is telling them who they are in advance and training them in advance so they know to have those kinds of conversations. Also pre-scouting where you can. This is an informal recommendation, like thinking about what kind of robots are going to be at the event. Look at your team list. If you can see teams that have already played, how did they play, and take notes on that. especially later in the season, like at DCMP, I'm going to know what 9062's autos are going to look like because I'm going to see them at their first 2 events. And I'll go, okay, I'm in the same div as them. Let's see if we were together, hypothetically, what autos do we have that match? Things like that. If you have practice field access with other teams, that's great. But you also have a whole database of information available to you if you're not able to get out and play with them.
Yeah, we tend to not do super formal pre-scouting, pre-champs. Just kind of watching the teams, getting a general idea for how they are doing. I know a lot of teams do like actual numbers and like real scouting kind of for it. I don't have a whole lot of value in that unless the schedule's being released early, like it sometimes is in champs, where you can kind of have a good idea of what your partner's points are prior to like actually showing up. Because everybody
will do it properly for champs, partially to get a better like you'll watch teams, we take down the numbers, but it's mostly just to get an idea of like what people do from different regions. And it's also a means of training new scouts. One of the things that will have happen too is like our scouts that can't attend champs, we have to fill in scouts, and it's a good way to train scouts to get filled in by pre-scouting and like getting them up to date, because getting to Houston is hard for a lot of people. And then other things to do, like test your systems, test your communication methods, check that your scouting system hasn't completely broken, and then, you know, revisit your goal for each event and create a plan of attack. If my goal is to win the Newmarket District event, what things am I going to do? How am I going to play to win the Newmarket District event?
Yeah, going back to that 2023 example, you know, district champs for autos, we were looking for multi-game piece autos because that's the level of robot that we're at. When we get into a super stack division in Curie or not Archimedes in 2023, we're looking for just simple, reliable autos that are going to be complementary to teams that are better than us.
Conveniently, those happen to be the same autos we'd run earlier in the year because they were strong early on.
Inconveniently, they didn't work out.
Yeah, that's a different problem.
Okay, so understanding data. One of the things that I've been pushing for a long time is data validation. Does anybody here raise your hand if you have any idea what data validation is?
Raise your hand if you like implement it.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things that is kind of unique about us, which I'm not going to jump into like the whole nitty gritty of it, but validating your data to make sure your data is actually correct. So what we end up doing is we reference the API data and compare it versus our scouted data. And then it gives us an idea of how strong, how good our data is, basically. One of the things that teams run into all the time, and everybody has bad data, unfortunately. It's not very strong. There's a lot of issues with it. Is you take information and you assume that it is correct, which is why, especially at championships, you have this wide variety of opinions of who's good, who slipped through the draft. And then normally you have one alliance that somehow that gets an insane alliance and just does really well. Validating your data is a good way of getting an idea of how good your data is. So for us, we don't take data that we don't need, first of all. We are a very minimalistic team in terms of data acquisition. We don't count things like misses.
I do a quick poll of the field. Who scouted endgame in 2024? Like, who noted if a robot could climb or not manually?
We don't do that ever. The reason why we don't do it is because the API has direct access for that. And we do the exact same thing for like mobility, because mobility is also the same.
Like TBA or not? Do we use FIRST API or TBA? They're the same.
We use FIRST API because it's so
like it will tell me at the end of quals 42. It'll be like 4476 climbed, warp 7 did not climb, Dave climbed. Why would I scout and have my scout like look to try to figure out if you were off the ground from across a bleacher when the ref inputted data is available for you to use?
Yeah. Do you have a question? Last year, yeah.
Oh yeah, that completely screwed us though. That did happen.
Because we were thinking of using the API as well, but it was just like it wasn't.
Last year was terrible for some reason.
And it
I
was the
don't
only
really
year that's
understand
ever
why.
been that way.
Yeah,
I wasn't sure if there was a way for you to get it, even though.
we basically ran with no climb.
And
data.
what I would do as the scout person, and what we did in the scouting meeting, is you can still scroll through once the data get uploaded at the end of the day, and you can look and just be like, okay, we had some people who were not at the event, and we used Slack, had channels or had a note for each match, and they could put in like, okay, this team is good on the climb based on the data I've seen. So we had someone combing through that afterwards, but the API shouldn't break like the way it did.
Yeah.
Assuming that happens, but we've used that for 2022 and 2023.
And 2020.
And-
Since
and-
2020, we haven't
yeah.
scouted any climbs.
So, like scouting data for like not only like our team but like many teams is like very very important in terms of match strategy, because you can look at who you're with versus who you're against.
Pull it up.
And like as much as you can offset it with the API, at a certain point you have to like allocate some things manually to people in the
For sure.
stands. The issue with that is in recent years, I know in 2022, like our scouting data was very, very good. Particularly like this year, at least for my team, the scouting data that we got from the people in the stands was downright unusable. Like you would look at it and you would be like, I know for a fact that this team does not have a climber on their robot,
Yeah.
and it is telling me that they climbed. Which I think, at least from my perspective, is like a fault that comes from people's engagement and like people in the stand, because ultimately scouting is not the most like interesting thing ever. You're just sitting there like inputting things on a table. So is there a way sort of to get people more engaged in scouting and like actually care about what they're doing? Because it seems like, at least on like my team, a lot of people who are in the stands are kind of doing it on autopilot, and that actually like caused issues this year where we were going into a match and we had like no scouting data, and we were like looking at it like, I know for a fact this is incorrect.
There's a few ways that you can combat issues like that. This is our website, by the way. I've pulled up our data for ourselves, because then you can look and like laugh when we break. But we do have an attributes table of things that we know that a team can do. So in theory, it didn't work because I don't think we didn't get to the part where it like warned you and been like,
Yeah, so
you've been
basically
dumb.
this is a validation
But this is a
method.
validation table.
We know what approximately each team should be able to do. So if a scout ever reports something that a team is physically not capable of doing, it immediately would send a warning and be like, hey, look at this data.
You sure about that? So like for us, if anyone said that we could trap, we'd be like, you sure about that? So things like that. The actually making scouts like scout well, part of that is having them scout less. So even like, so they're less likely to make mistakes. This is how it looks to me, so I can access it on my phone while I'm talking to teams. If I don't have this, I mean, I'll cry a little bit, and then like go. First of all, it gets pushed to the server, so if you don't have data, like it wouldn't push the matches. It wouldn't have anything for it. It'll tell you how it was last time it was updated, so you'll know if it's not updated. But the problem is if your data's bad, like our champs data sucked, for example, and we had to use someone else's. Yeah, we didn't have scouts. We brought 7 people to champs for our students, so we were borrowing from other teams.
And we were running data validation on publicly available things, and it was abysmal. So
we stole all of Spectrum's data because they posted it on Chief Delphi the night before, and then we used it, and then we knocked them out in round 1.
Anyways, going back to kind of, it's not, I don't want to focus too much on scouting, but in terms of things that we have had work is, I think a big problem with a lot of scouting teams is they don't really understand what the data is being used for. They don't see the value. They just see, I'm typing in numbers or I'm writing things down on a piece of paper, and like nothing ever happens with it. Like, there's no input and output. And I think one of the things that has helped us with that is,
everyone gets a pick list.
Yeah, we have everybody create pick lists, for example.
Well, it's
and
super
then,
readable. Sorry.
Yeah, we're halfway through like redesigning a bunch of things. But
Yeah.
anyways, we have every individual
Good.
scout has their own pick list, so they're ranking teams, so they feel like they have some sort of input on that. And then what we do for our pick list sessions is you take the average and you basically average out the list, and then you have a starting point. So it's a time save, and then also like the scouts feel like they have some input in that because they're reading it for different reasons. Another big thing, which, I mean, we're not going to say or put out some of the comments, but we encourage very extensive commenting, I guess, and the kids have a lot of fun with that in terms of
being harsh, being
being creative in the way that they maybe convey their message about how they feel about that team.
Because then they remember it too, right? Like,
the main reason for that is they find it funny because, you know, whenever we pull it up and then they're like, oh yeah, this team was XYZ. And then they remember that match. There's a connection there because now they have a direct comment with that where they're like, oh yeah, that was the time where they tried to pick up 10 notes in a row and they couldn't pick up any of them.
Oh my God, that's the time they hit the ref in the face. Hilarious.
Yeah.
Things like that. To keep scouts engaged.
So we do a lot of work on strong comments. Anyways.
You were here.
Another important thing with data is just because a team is not doing something right now doesn't mean that they can't. There's a lot of scenarios where teams will get pigeonholed into certain roles or, for example, when games are score capped, so like 2017, 2023, when there's only so many game pieces you can score, if you're with a really strong alliance, you might see reduced numbers for that. So it's really important to look at not just like averages and dive into the data more. So you're looking at their maxes and mins, looking at why they did really well in this one match. Were they being fed the entire time and they had great numbers because of that? Or why did they do really poorly? It's like, okay, well, they were cleaning up at the end, but like their feeders were getting destroyed on defense and one of them was broken or whatever, so there's nothing to score. Don't get tricked by just looking at raw averages. Look at the data a little bit closer.
And then watch your match videos back to answer those questions.
Yeah. So we'll regularly look at match videos for outlier matches specifically for teams that we're interested in seeing. Why did you do really well this match? Why did you do really badly this match?
Match planning for every match. So now that you're at the event, you've got your data, you're at the event, you are in quals 4, what are you going to do? So this is kind of my bread and butter. First things first, make sure all members are present of the alliance. This is for every match. This includes eliminations, but also quals as well. Creating a plan with 2 people when there are 3 people on alliance will result in increased time communicating it to the third person. You'll have to probably redo a bunch of it anyways because they're going to have opinions that they disagree with the plan. Get everyone there. I don't care how you get everyone there. If you're waiting outside their pit because they're like, I'll be ready in 5 minutes, you stay there and you wait because you can't start really doing it without them. Come into the match with a possible plan. So this would be me, and within my team we'll have talked of a possible plan. But the presentation of this is key. Strategy is a huge soft skill field, and you have to be flexible and willing to adapt. When I started strategy, I was terrible because I was way too excited. I was way too eager to press our plans, and that directly contributed to the downfall of our playing at the 2018 championships because I was not flexible enough. And that's one of the things that was a huge learning lesson. But you have to be flexible and willing to hear others out. Even if in the end you go your way, you have to be willing to accept that you might be wrong or that other people might have more insight than you do. And then having backup plans is another one. Having plans, especially if you know that a team has been broken recently. That's one of the ones that I will always like to have a plan for, or if I know that I might be broken. In Newmarket, in 2023, we shredded all of our electronics for our whole arm. And there were some matches where we showed up to the field with our arm duct taped together. So going into that match, I had a plan for if we worked, and I had a plan for if we didn't work. And it was when you check in with your pit crew, you're like, okay, are we going plan A or plan B? If it's going to be close, you communicate and plan both as an alliance. If something like that's going to come down to the wire. In the conversation, politely, it is helpful if you can use scouting numbers to validate discussion. Especially At championships, I find this to be the case where teams are like, yeah, we can do like 15 notes in like 20 seconds or something absurd, right? You can look and be like, oh, is that so? Like, I was expecting a more of an average performance of this. Would you say that that's reasonable? And then we can plan around that. Again, it's all in the soft skill. At champs, you'll have harder time. But in Ontario, generally, people are very honest and willing to listen. So that's great. Shout out Ontario. Within the match planning, you discuss your RP targets. You can look at the number of scored game pieces between your alliance, see how close you are to that threshold. If it's going to be a reach, if it's going to be a lock, talk about plans for that and deciding if there's a point where you abandon the RP and like coming to a consensus on when that would be in a match. Say this year it's 18 and say the co-op doesn't happen. As an alliance, if we look and we're like 12 notes with a minute left to go, if we are not there, we are just going for the win. Or maybe if we're down by X value, we're going to give up on the win and we're just going to push for the notes scored and we're not even going to worry about amplifying them. We're just going to score them in quickly because we know that we can get them in faster. Things like that. It is also underrated to determine the human player positioning of everyone before you get to the field. The human players are often the youngest members of drive teams, and these poor, like, lost children are trying to find their way on the field if you don't tell them where to go. So identify and determine that. If there's a role that involves the human player doing a specific thing, identifying that and making sure they are comfortable with that. And if there's like a communication that needs to be made, standardizing that for them. This year, it's like, all right, your amp person knows how to scream and count down from 10, right? Sick, we're good. Carrying on. Identify who is ensuring co-op is an option if that is a part of the game. For example, this year, say it's a match with Brennan, Nikita, and Brendan in the back. Which one of the three of them is going to go talk to the other alliance to make sure they're doing co-op? Are you all going to go talk to them? That's fine. But you want to make sure, especially when you're dealing with your opponents, that you like have a plan. You don't just like show up and be like, yo, and then like later, like Nikita goes and shows up and is like, yo, like what are we doing? You want to be clear and concise about that in this match planning. And then once you're done, if that's the way you do it, you relay your info back to your drive coach. If you are the drive coach, you have the knowledge in your mind. Things like that. We don't have a standard for whether or not Brennan shows up. Sometimes I'll decide that I want Brennan to show up. Sometimes Brennan's doing stuff in the pit and he can't show up, and then I'll relay it to him afterwards. We kind of are flexible in this way. That's honestly what I would recommend. Don't make it like a rule that like, man, banned. Walking nearby, go away. Like, be flexible. Just because an event is so hectic that like having strict rules like that can honestly be more detrimental than anything. This is our whiteboard that we use. We used to just use a single whiteboard. This year, we stole it from 254 at Champs in 23. We saw they had this, and we liked it, so we stole it. 3 fields on our whiteboard, and the whiteboard's now, like, yay big.
Massive.
Yeah, it's, like, on a clipboard. It's large. Harder to get lost, bonus. But the main thing is, this is the auto field. This is the teleop field, and this is the end game field. So this way, we can have everything on it, and you can refer back to it. The 3 stages of the match are now broken down, so you can have your auto positioning here, but if I want to show my cycle paths in teleop, I'm not drawing over my auto data. So things like that are super, super valuable, and then I have a ton of space for notes, got space for you to write in the people, including we've even got human player positioning is writable on the board. This will change with every game, but I super, super recommend if you've got a tablet, flipping through and having a field for auto and teleop and endgame, it's so nice. And if we don't have a ton of time to talk before a match, it's written out in a way that you can get up to speed relatively quickly. And then he can like text with questions or anything. Because when you're a strat, one of the biggest issues is things changing on the fly in queue that as a strat person you are not privy to because you don't have a button. So things like that. Highly recommended. The other thing, I showed a bit of our website. This is the plan for our pre-match planning dashboard. Basically, you've got your graphs. You've got a thing about not only yourselves, but your partners and your opponents. So you can look and you can say, if you think that they're close to an RP and a little bit of defense is gonna like prevent that, maybe we're gonna, spend a little bit of time playing defense. You can see teams' peaks and highs. You can contextualize your data a little bit. This is not the final version of it. We're still working on it. And then we also have one of these buttons here shows all the comments for a team, so you can quickly flip through them as well. And that's a flickable button, so I don't have it like out for the world to see. Because again, if we're encouraging our scouts to make ruthless, heartless comments, I don't want everyone to see those. Things like that.
Okay. Common strategy stuff that is kind of universal among multiple years. One of the really important things when you are trying to evaluate playing defense on someone, a lot of teams kind of default to the level of they're the best team, let's play defense on them. Really, what you're looking for is finding the opponent's biggest weaknesses and targeting those rather than the best team who may be good at playing under defense because they practice like that a lot. So an example for this in 2023 is targeting, or at least for late season stuff, targeting source defense rather than like subwoofer defense, where competent teams are going to be able to shoot from a variety of locations and it's kind of hard to block them. But when there's a choke point near the source through getting through the stage, especially avoiding end game fouls, as we kind of talked about earlier, targeting zones like that are going to be a little bit more fruitful often. Another really key thing is you can kind of get mixed up in really complicated strategies that are better if you can execute them. The problem is executing them is very challenging, especially in quals when you only have the one match to work on something. It's a little bit easier in elims where you can kind of build up this relationship with your partners and try and develop and implement new things. But oftentimes the simple plans are going to be the best and most effective plans. You don't have to do something crazy. Another thing is be conservative with getting RPs. The number of times that I've seen, like in 2023, people push balancing till like 1 millisecond left in the match, and then they lose the ranking point, and then they actually lose the match as well because it's worth a lot of points, is a high. So make sure that you're aware of the scoreboard. Especially, it's just so bad when you're up by like 200 points or whatever, and then you miss the ranking point. It's like, oh.
Like, go climb early, please.
Yeah, you don't have to be crazy about that. The number of times behind the glass too that I've just like,
go climb.
Climb
like
and we win. Climb and we win. And they're driving the opposite direction to go to another cycle. It's like, come back, we're good. We don't need it. Don't get a foul. It happens a lot. Another kind of fundamental thing is like good synergy among the alliance is more important than the best strategy. If you have 3 robots that are great, that are all trying to do this optimal strategy that maybe people don't fully understand or don't agree with, some teams don't want to execute on that. It's way better to be pushing in a unified way and then make sure that you're all doing something useful that everybody kind of understands and agrees with, rather than rogue actions that happen. It also makes you look not very attractive as an alliance partner. When we have teams that are just kind of doing random things that we didn't agree for, and then you realize that, maybe we wouldn't work super well as an alliance because we weren't able to stick to a plan. Even if you're not maybe highlighting the things that you'd like to highlight in terms of your team. Next.
Record and analyze your matches with the drive team.
Yeah, so we review matches immediately with the drive team so that we can kind of talk about what we did well, what we didn't do well, and ways to improve.
That includes in elims as well.
Yeah. Yep.
So in those post-match discussions, do you include like strat to convey because oftentimes there is like a large deviation from what you wrote up to what was actually executed.
Yeah.
Do you have strat like physically present at that meeting saying asking hey, what happened? Or do you have a separation where it's like the drive coach is the communicator between
Yes,
drive some
for us, the strat team actually runs those meetings, and then the drive coach is like they're still a driver in terms of like some of the more drive team related things where it's like execution on like, hey, I said to do X, and then we were having issues with that. But the strat team will come immediately with for us with tablet. We'll watch the video. We'll be like, okay, so I noticed that this didn't go according to plan. It was great how you adapted to this. You probably should have changed this up when X was happening, that kind of thing.
So, and part of that too is the more fleshed out your plans are in the beginning, and the more you've prepared, like for backup plans, a strat member will recognize when plan B is implemented instead of plan A. And know, oh, okay, yeah, I told him to do this and he didn't do this, but he did something intelligent. So he probably like thought about what he was doing and chose to do something else for a reason. And we'll talk about that. Because the strategist too, like we will give feedback on drive coach calls. And what we did this year, which I really liked, was the kid who ran our strat debriefs was a former drive team member as well, like a recent former drive team member. And so he was able to communicate well. Our drive team was very young this year. Both our driver and operator were grade 9. So he had that relationship with them pre-existing on the team and was able to communicate with them. And mostly, but it was still me giving feedback to Brennan, the mentor, because like positions of power and stuff like that. It's easier for me to give that feedback, or for the drive team to like pull me aside and be like, hey, Taegen, can you tell Brennan that like we didn't like how he did that thing? Things like that. So they run through strat still that way in that regard. Now, when you're doing this in a LIMS, you do want to respect each team because we do it as an alliance. You want to respect each team's procedure for how they do that. So, like, check with them and be like, hey, do you want us doing match review with your drive coach only so they can communicate onwards? Do you want us involved at all? Generally, we'll push to at least show the video and have them present because that's super valuable. But you do want to respect teams' procedures. You don't want to, like, come in and imposing and, like, go talk to this driver that you've never met and be like, you need to do this different. It's way better to like ask how they do it and fit into their procedures than impose your own.
Word.
Oh, I already changed the slide. I'm good.
So for crescendo specific stuff, making sure that you're using your amplified time properly, maximizing those 4 notes. This evolved over the season where in the beginning, 1 or 2 notes per amp cycle is pretty reasonable. At champs, anything that isn't 4 is terrible, and you should fix that. Passing was super critical. Like I said, a lot of teams didn't really do a lot of that early on, but it developed a lot, especially at champs. Targeted autos. So one of the things that we had, or we were lucky enough this year to have is reliable auto path planning stuff that actually did what we told it to do. Basically, every single autonomous we ran in terms of elimination in district champs and worlds and Einstein were first-time runs. So we wrote specific autos based on us watching the opponents and realizing what their timings were to different notes, and we would target specific notes because we were not organized enough to have an autonomous that would, go here, then here, then here, then here, whatever the particular optimized order was for that.
The goal would be to have them in advance and just choose which one you wanted for the
Yes.
record. Not really recommend running your first time auto on
But
Einstein.
having that flexibility was massive for us because we were constantly denying notes from other teams.
It's not really a strategy, but it was something that needed to be discussed every match, was avoiding G424s.
Yeah, especially at champs.
Our alliance. Our Einstein
We
playing
were
alliance.
very good at getting 4
like a 424 every match in Olymps. I kid you not. So that was discussed every match.
Yeah, and then playing defense while opponents are amplified, even if it's not subwoofer or that kind of thing, just slowing down the cycle so that they can't get back in time helps. So a lot of teams will start amplified cycles before they have notes fully prepped. So actually punching above your weight, what is kind of the bread and butter in terms of you're an underdog and you got to do something? The number one thing that I like to say is make your opponents think. Thinking is bad, and that maybe sounds stupid because obviously thinking is usually important, but making them think in the match is what our goals are when we're playing against a perceived better alliance on paper. Our goal is to make them think as much as possible and hopefully make the wrong decisions. So don't enter matches like, oh, we're screwed, it's over, we're just gonna just do whatever, doesn't even matter. We have an optimism there. Basically all of our matches, we never go in saying like, oh yeah, we're for sure gonna win this match against like this super stacked alliance when we're screwed or whatever. But we do want to have an outlook of like, okay, we're going to make it hard for them. We're going to make it a little bit challenging. They're going to have to think a little bit during this match. You do have to play unorthodox. You can't play standard when you're playing against a stronger alliance. It's just never going to work, basically, unless they make mistakes. The way that they make mistakes is by thinking. So make them think.
Think say it's a game where it's triple offense and they outscore you by 3 game pieces reliably, and imagine that's a lot. Make up a game. If they're gonna always outscore you on the same strat, you can't play the same strat. So this year in particular, 3 offense, you might have to do 2 offense and like a hybrid offense robot. You have to do something different. You can't beat them at their own game and like bash your head against a wall if you're gonna try to beat them.
You want to identify their weaknesses and try and exploit it. And when your opponents make mistakes, don't fumble, don't get stressed. Because one of the big things that happens, in our match against 254 and 2056 in 2023, when they got knocked out, our alliance, which knocked them out, was very panicky. They're like, oh my, we're winning. This is unbelievable. I have no idea. And they're so stressed behind the glass.
We were the backup.
And then us being that rock solid behind the scenes, kind of just like, okay, guys, we just here's how we do it. We just need to close it out. Don't stress about it. Let's make sure we do this. Finish off our links. Get the climbs. It's all good. Making sure that you're not doing that, because good teams get in your head, right? You have the expectation of 2056 has this like huge win streak. There's no way we can beat them. Well, you never know what can happen, right? In terms of like making people think, I guess another one that came up this year is our autonomous that went through the midline and shuffled up everything. Again, it's something to make people think. I don't think that was like a game-winning thing. I think it was a little bit getting in our opponents' heads a little bit, rather than I think they still should have won that series. But having those questions for them to answer makes them potentially make mistakes. Another thing that you can kind of abuse sometimes is like the repetition of certain drive teams or certain actions that they'll do. One of the common ones, which is a big throwback, but in 2014, there was an inbounder, basically, where they had to put the ball either into play on the field on either the left or the right side of the field. And teams tend to just do the same one every single time. And one of the easy things that you can do is you just park and block the one side that they always go to. And, now we have to think, we got to go to the other side. And now you just wasted a whole bunch of time that they weren't originally thinking of, right? So it's just thinking of things like that are more adding up to how you can create an upset, rather than kind of being like we'll just do some anarchy kind of gameplay, and if they don't know what we're doing, or if we don't know what we're doing, they don't know what we're doing kind of strategy, which generally is bad.
I just want to kind of zoom through because we're running low on time.
Yep.
Making a winning pick list. This isn't actually about like how to make a pick list. I trust that you can look at your data and make your pick list from it. But again, using your pick list to your advantage. So say you've sorted through actually making your picks, refer back to the alliance compositions. The best robot on your div and the second best robot on your div may have very different roles that either complement you or distinctly don't. Think about alliances that work well together, and say there's one scoring location, like this year, for example, you have a feeder, you have a cleaner. There's no use having an alliance of 3 cleaning robots if no one's feeding in the first place. So how can you create the winning compositions? Also preparing, if you've seeded or if you are intending to seed and you're close to it, if it's a 2-day event, a when to decline or how to scorch list. So in our case, in 2023 at District Champs, we were way overseeded. We were good. We were not first on the field, better than 254 and Dave good. So
254.
Sorry, 2056 good. We weren't better than them either.
Yeah.
But we had the advantage in our case of being ahead, and we were able to make a list of picking people in the optimal order to maybe get a chance at being with something better, or at least messing up the field for everyone else. So, for example, we seeded first. We picked 7558, who was we would have been happy to play with any of these robots. We picked 7558, and they're like, well, you're first seed and you're way overseeded. So if I accept, we have 2056 and Team Dave together. So I can't do that. So they decline. So then we're like, okay, cool. We're going to pick Dave. And Dave can either accept us, be with us, decline, form their own alliance. Either are completely viable options. Regardless, they're not with 2056. So now we're happy. We don't have to deal with that. They chose to accept. Had they not accepted, then they would have declined. Now we can ask OP, who had seeded second. If we just straight ask OP, they're going to insta decline. There's no point in asking. But now that options are off the board for them, say Dave declines.
Change their mind.
Maybe they change their mind and they go, okay, well, we'll play with Waffles. But in the end, we still got a team that we were very happy playing with. We had options for if they declined. OP probably still would decline, and then we would have picked someone else, and we still would have been happy, and no one would have been together, and then we would have had a better chance. Things like looking at these situations and evaluating how you can make the most of something that you luck into, because you might luck into something that you can make the most of. Have questions on your bubble teams. If you've got teams that are in your picking region, if you make a simulated bracket, have questions that you can ask when you get back to the field the next day or message them online. And ask them those questions. Identify drop-off regions in the team list. That can also help guide when you want to decline. If you're going to be seated really high with a weak captain, maybe it's worth declining because there's a drop-off after the 18th robot. Look at those drop-offs on your list. Recognize robots with rare qualities. If there's a role where someone needs to do something and there's 3 teams at the event that can do that thing, maybe you pick them earlier than you would otherwise, because then no one else gets them and you do. An example for us was there was a really strong defense robot in 2019 that we picked on the 7th seed, which was, in theory, by their numbers, they were overpicked, but they were the best defense robot at the event, and we made it to finals with them on the 7th seed because of that. And in 2025, there's a pick clock, so do all this and be super prepared. In elims, very similar to quals. There's just a few extra things. Get to know each other is underrated. Do that. Identify strengths of every robot on the alliance, what roles they play, and how they can maximize. Spend some time predicting your opponent's moves, but have your backup plans. Be prepared to be wrong. For us, we did look at the teams that we were playing against, and we were looking at their autos. It doesn't mean that they're going to guaranteed run those autos, but try to have plans for that. Develop communication methods, because now you're in alliance and you've got a few matches together. You may as well talk to each other in a way that makes sense for all of you. Test out what you can on your practice field and post-match rewatch with everyone. Any questions?
Basically out of time, but
I'm zooming. It's fine.
yeah, it's fine. We'll just end it.
And there.
Yeah.
If you want, we kind of embedded them in, but for those who didn't know, we went on a crazy run at Champs, so we learned lots of things. If you want to come talk to us about it after, feel free to stick around. But yeah, any questions to wrap up the presentation? Thank you.
One question.
Do you guys take any quantified data on reliability? Whether or not a robot works in the match and kind of average that out, or do you just look at the comments?
We just look at the comments exclusively. Generally, we try to avoid making quantitative understandings of those because they tend to be skewed. Everybody's kind of different opinion of what a broken robot looks like is a problem.
Like a Rio reboot is different than a radio reboot, and like having a number for that isn't super helpful. You can also just run a series of bad matches in a row. Like, oh, maybe your intake was bent, so it looks like they're broken, but they're not dead. Oh, now they're dead. Oh, now they're dead, but if you ask them, they were dead for 2 different reasons. Things like that. The data, like seeing that they didn't score anything is data enough in those cases.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Cool. Under my
Singer guys.